Upavistha Konasana, seated angle pose, part 1. Jane begins in Dandasana, then takes her legs wide. As we look at Jane's pose, we can see her legs have rolled out and gone limp. Her toes and knees are no longer pointing at the ceiling. Her left foot is further from her midline than her right foot. Jane's back has bowed, her chest has collapsed, she's leaning forward and holding herself up with her arms. Let's have her start over. First, Jane wants to use her hands to push her legs apart to help keep the insides of her thighs relaxed. She wants her left heel to be as far from her midline as her right heel, but Jane's right hip is tighter than her left and won't open as far. To even her legs, she needs to bring in her left leg. Next, Jane wants to roll her legs inward so her thighs, kneecaps, shins, and toes point toward the ceiling. She may want to use her hands to help roll her thighs and shins inward. Then she needs to stretch the insides of her legs toward her heels as she pulls the outside of her thighs toward her hips. As Jane's calves stretch to her heels, her kneecaps lift toward her hips. She wants her heels to remain on the floor as she flexes her feet. Jane wants to lift her pelvis so she sits on the middle of her sits bones. Then she wants to continue the lift up her spine. She wants her legs and hips to sink into the floor as her torso rises away from the floor. She then places her hands on the floor next to her hips, just as in Dandasana. To exit the pose, Jane wants to use her hands to draw her legs back before stretching into Dandasana. Let's watch Jane's skeleton in Upavistha Konasana. As we look at her initial pose, we can see how her feet are uneven. She's rocked back toward her sacrum, her chest has collapsed, her head is forward, and her legs are rolled out. She's using her arms to hold herself up. Let's have her try again. First, Jane wants to take her legs out evenly while keeping the insides of her thighs relaxed. Then she wants to roll her legs inward so the thigh, knee, shin, and toes point toward the ceiling. She wants to stretch the insides of her legs toward her heels as the outside of her thighs pulls up to her hips. Jane wants her heels to stay on the floor as she flexes her feet, lifts her kneecaps, and stretches her calves toward her heels. Next, Jane wants to lift her pelvis and balance on the middle of her sits bones. Then she wants to continue the lift up her spine, making her upper body light as her lower body sinks toward the floor. Finally, she rests her hands by her hips. To exit the pose, Jane uses her hands to bring her legs back together before stretching into Dandasana.